Are there lousy
Wait
cultures?
a minute, I've got to hear John's interpretation for me.
Are there lousy cultures that hinder economic development? What can we do about it?
Well, you got to begin with understanding different cultures, and it's terribly important that we do. One of the things that I object quite strongly to is that so much of the conflict in the world evolves out of the fact that we do not try to understand different belief systems and the way they work. Now, that doesn't mean you have to give in to them. It doesn't mean you have to accede to them. It does mean that the beginning of our interacting effectively with other groups in the world is, first of all, understanding different ways in which the world works. And we don't do that, and I think the United States is as bad as any, because when we find that people disagree with us, we tend to kill them, and that's not a good way to do it. We want to try to learn why people have different belief systems, why they operate. We may then find that they're no good, but that's the beginning of wisdom, is attempting to find out about how different ways of understanding the world operate. And I can't emphasize this enough, because I think my own country is terrible at it.
Okay, for the last question, I'd like to call on my colleague, Florian.
My name is Florian Alburo from the School of Economics. Professor North, I was intrigued by the last few comments, few notes you had in your talk about the transition from limited access order to open access order. And I want to ask you, how important is the layer between the leadership and the people below? And I'm referring to the bureaucracy, civil service. Reading Gunnar Myrdal's classic work on an inquiry into the poverty of nations, he argues that India have very strong civil service. And in his book, he only says that it was only superseded by the Philippines. And the question that I want to ask is, how important is it in the transition from what you call LAO to open access order? After all, leaders are not forever. And the question is, how do you contain that so that you move towards an open access order? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question, and my answer is certainly incomplete. We don't know a lot about the process of persuasion of change in the world and how it works. Quite clearly, charisma and people that have charisma are much more influential in attempting to induce people to change their minds than others are. And obviously, when you take a look at particular events that have been powerful, like Martin Luther King, to take an illustration, obviously individuals play a big part. But I guess I put my emphasis still on the fact that what you have to do is get elites to be able to be willing or forced, both ways, to give up privileged status and to extend the rights of citizenship to a wider and wider group of the society, and to create institutions and organizations to do that. Now, there's no doubt that individual leadership can play a big role in that. But after having said that, I can't say any more.
Okay, that brings our open forum to a close. And on behalf of the Centennial Lecture Series Committee, we thank Professor North for his insightful views that he shared with us this afternoon. And we would also like to thank the audience for the very good questions that they posed. Okay, before we close, we would like to listen to a few closing remarks from the beloved Dean of the School of Economics, Professor Emmanuel S. de Dios.
Excellent. Well, first of all, I'd like to express my thanks for the talk of Professor North. Just like to say a few words in behalf of the School of Economics. It's a significant occasion, especially for the School of Economics, because if I try to recall, I think this is about only the second time that a Nobel Prize winner in economics has entered these halls. The first one was Simon Kuznets, Nobel Prize winner in '71. And of course, he was famous for instituting making a big contribution towards the system of national income accounts. He died in 1985. That was about more than 3 decades ago. A great deal of time is spanned by the visit of Kuznets and Douglas North. That is a time when, the economics profession itself has changed from trying just to measure economic growth to trying to actually understand how it works, and that has been Professor North's singular contribution. It's also a long time for a country that at the time had the confidence, I thought it had the confidence, that sooner or later it would get a grip on its social and economic problems. It seemed to have been on the threshold, doorstep conditions. Now we find a society that has its social fabric fraying, trust in institutions eroded, and new institutions being uncertain that they will actually arise and serve the needs of the people. That is the task that, of course, Professor North's talk today has sort of made us understood how complex that process has been. And if there's one thing that we can take away from the talk of Professor North, it is that things are never that simple. I'm particularly impressed by the great humility and greatness of spirit of Professor North in admitting that some questions simply do not have pat answers. There is no Messiah, at least, in a secular sense. There is no magic bullet. There is no overall general theory of everything, not even of institutions. One has to do the grunt work of trying to understand each and every society as it is. So we are not here merely as listeners to someone who from on high will give us the formula for resolving Philippine problems. We are here actually as participants in the mainstream that is carrying us along, even as we try to understand where we are going and how to resist the current if we need to. I think it is that extra knowledge that we are able to learn when we listen to Professor North. And the message, therefore, is that there's no substitute for hard thinking. There's no substitute for hard work. And that's the message I'd like to take away from this. Now, speaking of hard work, I'd like to thank at the end those members of our staff